All right, friends, homework number 3. This is how I would do these problems. Problem number 4 says, or this first one, solve the following equations for x, where a, b, c, d, e, and f are real numbers not equal to 0. If you get stuck, you can put in actual numbers for a, b, c, and c, and think about how you would solve these equations, and then apply that thinking to the equations below. The steps are the same as solving equations that have numbers in them. It just, we're building an expression because we can't evaluate it because we don't know what the values are. So here we go. All right, we're solving for x, which means I want to isolate x. So my goal, parentheses, to isolate x. And I look at it and I see that x is being multiplied by b. And then that whole thing, we're adding d to that. So I'm going to undo this backwards. Okay. So what I would do, the first thing I would do is I would subtract d from both sides. So that gives me b times x equals a minus d. And the second thing I would do, because it's x times b, I would divide the left side by b. If I divide the left side by b, I have to divide the right side by b. So that gives me x equals a minus d divided by b. That's one way to express the answer. You could also write the answer as x equals 1 over b times the quantity a minus d. You could also distribute that. A over b minus d over b. Any of those are correct. I think for the video, I'm just going to do the left-hand side ones, and then I'll go back in for the answer key and do the right ones too. Okay, for C, my goal is to isolate x. And x is being divided by AB. So I think what I want to do is I want to multiply both sides by AB over 1. Because I'm going to get AB times x divided by 1 times AB. And if you notice, I have AB in the numerator, AB in the denominator, AB divided by AB, that's just going to equal 1. So these two together equal 1. So I've got 1x, or just x, equals c times a times b. I normally, when I'm multiplying out, when I've got a couple variables that I'm multiplying together, I normally put them in alphabetical order. It doesn't matter. Okay. Ooh, interesting. E. I have x in 2 places, so I think the first thing I would do, what would I do first? Okay, well, you could do, I see kind of 2 things I need to deal with. So I think the first thing that I would do is combine these like terms. EX plus FX, that's the same amount as E plus F multiplied by X. I just use the distributive property to do that. Well, distributive property backwards. Then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add C to both sides. So I get X times E plus F equals D plus C. And this is also like a group, like a quantity. And since it's X multiplied by E plus F, the way this amount, whatever this amount is, like that is a value. So I can divide this side by that value, by the value E plus F. And I can divide this side by the value E plus F. So then I get X equals D plus C over E plus F. That's what I would do. Wowza, I'm looking at F and like this problem over here, and this one seems tricky too, so I think I'll do it in my video. I see X on both sides of the equation, so I think the first thing I would do is I would get the X's on the same side of the equation, so I'm going to add Bx to both sides. Oops, Bx. So I have Ax plus Bx minus C equals, this part right here is just 0. That's 0 equals D. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing I did for part E. I'm going to take this part here and do distributive property backwards. And then I also notice here, it's subtracting C, so the opposite of that is adding C. The inverse operation would be adding C. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm kind of doing 2 steps in one here. So I've got X times A plus B equals D plus C. And then the last thing I'm doing, this is a quantity, like one amount. Oops. So I'm going to divide this side by that amount. And I'll divide this side by that amount. So I've got X equals D plus C over A plus B. Let's look at the other ones. Oops, what happened? Okay. I'm trying to isolate X. I'm going to get that one by itself. Okay. So looking at this, X is being multiplied by A. Take that answer and subtract C. Take that answer and divide by D. So I'm going to do all that, but I'm going to do it backwards. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by D over 1. Okay. So then we have D in the numerator, D in the denominator, D on top, D on the bottom. That's just equal to 1. So I have AX minus C equals B times D. The next thing I'm going to do, it's subtracting C, so I'm going to add C to both sides. So I have AX equals B multiplied by D, and then add C to that answer. And then my last thing, it's A multiplied by X. I'm going to divide both sides by A. I have to divide the whole thing by A. So I have X equals B times D plus C divided by A. And again, same as the first problem we did, you could express this answer in a couple different ways. You could express it like I did here. You could express it using multiplication. Dividing by A is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal of that. So 1 over A times B times D plus C. Or you could use distributive property and distribute that out. B times D divided by A plus C divided by A. All right. And this one, trying to isolate X. What I would do here, it's A times B times X. I would divide that by A times B. So I need to divide the other side by A times B. X equals C divided by A times B. Done. Cool. I think to keep my videos short, I think I'm going to do like one video per section. So there you go.